Welcome to the call. And Mike, you've got, do you have the information up?
Do I have the information up?
Yeah, here. I'll put this in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
And then there's
Cecilia,
yes.
Can I ask, I know Scott is at a doctor appointment. I'm not sure he had a cross signal maybe about the invite to this. Just checking, did he send you his draft stuff that he was working on?
No, I emailed him back and said, do you have something to share? And I have not seen it. It's not to say that it's not here, but I don't know where it is. And then I'm going to try to look for the other stuff. So entertain people while I'm looking, please.
I'm just opening this in my other thing. Great.
Andy, do you want to share about the ESHIP summit, since we have a couple of people? Well, I guess everybody here kind of knows, but for those watching at home.
Then we can play Ask Me Anything for 2 minutes while you find that document. I don't know what you want to ask me, but feel free to jump in if anyone has any questions, or I can ask you anything.
Don't waste that opportunity. Like, somebody should ask Andy something.
Volto, maybe you could give us, while we're hanging out for a second, do you just want to give us an update? Oscar sent me, I would just be curious for like a 2-minute summary of the email I got from Oscar about the standards work globally. And we'll just use that for filler until we find what we need to find.
So yeah, basically, let me put one link here first so that everyone can get some context to the topic. So I'll just put that in the chat. So basically, that's kind of a placeholder website that we initially put into the event that we organized last December, November during SLAS, which was kind of a launch event for the concept as well. And the history with that OS for Growth it's in there in the ESHIP 4.6 channel as well. The kind of more background for that topic, but basically for this whole topic of open standards for growth. So open standards for that name came from that EU project where we applied funding, and because there was a name, we decided to use that. But that's kind of a temporary name as well. But it's basically an initiative that we have put forward from Startup Commons side, where it doesn't have an entity, it doesn't have any like a formal structure yet. But we're using that website as a way to bring people together around the same topic, around these standards that live in different places in different shapes. So here in ESHIP, it lives under 5X now for terminology, and then because there are these cross-cutting themes, it's also this 4.6. But then what's happening like outside US? That was mainly the point of what other things are happening. So basically, we have divided then in the open standards between the terminology, KPIs, and data model. And there's a dependency between all of this. And then each of these segments has kind of its own, let's say, committed groups that are mostly looking from certain perspectives. So this there's a separate around this data model, and then there's a separate around these KPIs, which is driven by Swiss Connect, and they have a group of 10 global financiers of economic development grants, where they have come to conclusion that this madness needs to stop. That there is no logic behind the KPIs, A, even if they exist, B, if someone's going to look after that, they should be looked at collaboratively. And finally, this group of financiers, through different steps, have come to conclusion that they want to work together on those KPIs that they deploy to the funding that they apply around the world. And they want to work on those KPIs together. And they now have then agreed, this group has agreed that they want to use this OS for growth as their umbrella as well. So that's super excellent that then they don't kind of live somewhere else, because this is not, this is an initiative. It's the top-down actors, bottom-up activity. Let's put it that way. So coming together to those who operatively work and want to find a conclusion. And then there's a separate group coming together that looks from the digital side, which we are leading, that digital side, the data model aspect, where we have Alberta province in Canada, then we have Estonia, we have Malaysia, basically in the funnel to commit to that. And basically the whole point is to then help run whatever the process collaborative becomes to how we establish these standards. But then this is kind of like an umbrella site where the whole name of that OS for growth is also then up to debate for people to change that, then eventually commit to it to make something better. But anyway, we just push it forward. And we drive the data model part, and we are hopes now we get this WishConnect to lead the KPI side, that they already have a consortium behind them of these financiers. And then the terminology is now strongest living here in the ESHIP community. So of course that would be great if we can kind of bridge that. And this way we would already have something like total probably 15 organizations globally, divided between these three groups that also have dependencies with each other. Obviously, the data model is dependent on the KPIs, is dependent on the terminology, and this is kind of the crazy mad logic that we are driving from all the different angles. That was not too short, but anyway, hopefully some logic behind that is clear enough now.
Thanks, Volto, and thank you to you and Oscar and everybody for driving on and sort of calling the conversation. When I read it, and I haven't gone super deep, was just thinking about how all of the work around the OS for growth conversation which is a global conversation, links with the conversation we're having here around sort of the vision for, the ecosystem building professional field, at least in the United States, which may lead to another standard that people can sign on to or not. I don't really know how we go global, but we're starting with this group to sort of take the input of the ESHIP Summit participants, and then how that also ties in with ESHIP Goal 4.6 around some sort of body or thing that is holding a lot of the ESHIP goal work, that is holding sort of standards for the profession and other things, and how that links with the other global things. I think our challenge always is, from the Kauffman perspective, is because our focus has to be on the US because of our founder. It's so helpful when someone else calls the global question. But I also think, Valto, I know you're linked in with the GEN group, and GEN is really, I hope as all this stuff continues to expand and grow and link, that we can lean into GEN a little bit more once we have something a little more concrete. But opening to the globe too quick to me might be a little overwhelming. So, but I just wanted to share that. I wanted you to share that just because I think it does link to this conversation around visioning and vision for a professional field that we're talking about here.
So,
yeah, and I just want to highlight the key point from our perspective is that while so many are very keen about what the terms are or what kind of those outcomes are, our perspective is mainly whatever is the right process and the right actors to establish that and look after that process that actually produces them. So we have from our side, why we initiate this is that we have no ambition to drive what they become, but we have high ambitions to look after the logic of however they get created, and that all of the actors that we know to be most credible in their own segments and areas are involved, so that it doesn't become a big company, private dominated standards that then nobody wants to follow because it drives someone's business more directly than someone else's. We also know that governments are by definition responsible for their local ecosystems. As such, they don't have natural global extensions. Then when we look at the big global financiers, they also have like USAID is the most kind of active in our world. They spend money in Africa, in Vietnam, in Macedonia, in developing countries, in many places. They fund these ecosystem development activities. And that's kind of like the US connection that is linked here already in that group of financiers looking after the KPIs. So the point of the global is that there is nobody who's going to take and fix it for us unless we join together and start fixing it. And we don't want to end up with, that you have to build cars with left steering and right steering separately just because people were not smart enough to come together in the digital age.
Yeah, right.
So I have a question. I know that because Scott's not here and we're not looking at the canvas that he's working on, but hearing Valto talk about process and hearing some different conversations this past week, how is it that you envision, like the people on this call, how is it that you envision once we put together something that's stake in the ground and say, here's what we've come up with, and then when there's dissent or when there's conflicting ideas, like how do we envision incorporating or conversing about this? Because it's a process, right? So the ESHIP goals, as they were curated and synthesized, particularly by Amanda, to come back, kind of put the first coat of paint out there, right? To put it on the website that sat on the Kauffman Foundation page, and then people were able to chime in and give their responses, and then we ended up having the ESHIP champions kind of help again curate. So do we have that kind of vision in place for what we want to do going forward?
One quick reaction to that, Celia, which is I recently had seen this comment that's really been sticking with me because it's such a simple way of saying something that I think many of us have come to realize through our work or maybe have intuited, but it was such a nice articulation of it. And it was a facilitator from our network who used to be the global leader of the set of spaces and the network that we, many of us grew up in. He said, the fundamental principle of all change management is that people support what they help create. And it was such a nice short way of saying something that I said, I think would probably resonate with many of us. And so to me, there's a couple things about that when you're talking about a vision like this, or even just the space of the foundational language or artifacts that we want to be rallying around and putting out there. It intersects also with process that what you don't want is 1,000 people all offering their best version of 6 words to go together. And so to me, the types of input that are really valuable are in a lot of ways the ones that we have modeled through our process or tried to engage in, I think. And again, what I hope is in many ways implicit to a lot of our work, which is that broad types of understanding about the type of statement we want, about the way it might work, about who it's for, about the values. To me, those are all, that's one type of input that you can gather and one type of co-creation that you can do. It gets very, for me, my experience, it gets very different and very difficult if you're trying to ask individuals or even groups of people to either have input on or to I guess, a specific articulation of an idea, or like that one concise statement you're going for. So for me, my take is that this process ought to look like potentially input on values and on overall mission, purpose, those types of things. I do think that the ambition of this group has nonetheless been to get feedback on and try and land that one thing. And I don't want to go too far here, but just to say that Scott and I, through conversations, I know he has a few different versions of those in the works. There's one that he and I both kind of liked. I don't exactly want to steal his thunder at all. At the same time, I think it would be cool for this group to bat it around a little bit. So anyway, I can share that, but I would love to hear everyone else's thoughts on the process too.
My general sense has just been that we've been continually using input from at least the ESHIP community to help refine this first version. It's, you know, over years actually of input and insights, plus everything that I think folks that are on this call have been synthesizing in their brains over all that input. I think we'll have an opportunity at, you know, there's the ESHIP Summit's going to happen over 3 days. The 15th and 16th are a much wide audience, and the 29th is really focused on the professional field level work that we've done at past summits. I think given, I mean, I haven't seen I don't know where the final version of this is going to end, but I think there's will be an opportunity in some way to get feedback from the folks on the 15th and 16th. I think obviously there'll be opportunities on the 29th. I think whatever that refined version is will then be somewhat public in the sense that it got unveiled at a conference with a number of people at it. And so I think if people want to keep sharing it, you know, outside of the networks of who comes to the event, if we want to create a way for people to provide feedback. What I do know is I think the intent is to use whatever that input is to help inform some work that I think we're all going to be engaged in much more after the summit, which is figuring out what Goal 4.6 looks like, this standards body or center of excellence or center of gravity for the field. The Common Foundation has an interest in supporting that work and sort of creating it as an anchor to potentially be, I don't know if it's a new organization or a constellation of current organizations, to sort of hold some of that activity, particularly in the United States. I don't again know what that looks like. We're going to have to co-create it through a process I'm working on, which is a process we're trying to figure out what that will be. But that vision will then inform that, and I think will just continually be refined until we're at a point where we just have to make a decision and say this is it, at least for that entity. But certainly people can interpret it in their own ways and other ways. So I think the continual feedback and dissenting opinions are very welcome. And I think there's still a couple more checkpoints to get feedback, but part of it is this group's task is to sort of come up with the solid version that we need reaction to versus a too long or too wordy or too deep that people aren't going to be able to look at because it's too much. That's my sense of it. But then in a way, we've been sort of trying to incorporate dissenting feedback into it already, and that this group, as a small group who knows each other, can actually be the ones to sort out the dissentingness of it.
I'm curious to hear from Hassan, Brett, Beth. What do you think?
I agree. I think at this point, we need to get something out there that people can respond to. Because I think we can continuously keep thinking this through and wordsmithing things, and I think at some point we need to get something out there that people can react to, and then things can start to move from there.
Yeah, I would agree with what everybody is saying. And I'm at an intersection, so if I get quiet for a second, I apologize. The process has been really cool, and I really appreciate going through it with all of you. And I can't wait to see where all of this goes, and I can't wait to hear and see the reactions to the final draft product, and hear the dissension if there is any, and there probably will be, which will be great.
Cool. Brett and Walter?
Brett, do you want to go?
I mean, for me, it's more just clarity questions. I look at the scope of work of what we put together, and you know, I think we have some clean ideas. But as we, you know, it's July, so I think we're stretch run here, and what we want to be able to finalize and put out. And I guess I'm still unclear on, having never been to a summit. Just that hurts, but I'm still unclear on how this is going to roll out and be interacted with, and how we're going to pull from attendees to be able to do what Beth said, which is pick it apart and attack it and maybe disagree with it. All good things. I guess that's the piece that's missing for me. I mean, we you know, all this work that's in the sandbox folder. I mean, it's a good collection of things. I do agree too that I think Hassan made the point that it's kind of time to feel good about what we have and move it into some formative state that can be acted upon. But I just miss that clarity to be able to kind of have real clean records, I guess.
And Mike should be able to answer some of that in a second, but Balto, any other added thoughts? Otherwise we can probably just go into it.
Yeah, I actually wanted to highlight this point that there's actually, whenever the field-wide vision is out, let's say version 1, if we want to call it, that's not the only outcome here. And I want to highlight that the other outcome is actually the process that we created along the way to be able to produce it. And that is highly valuable. I would recommend that to be documented separately to basically capture that, because that's both the rationale for the credibility of the outcome itself, but it's also a hopefully repeatable process for other needs. And it correlates with that work that I'm doing as part of that 5X channel work, which is defining the process, where we have look at the process as its own thing to how to define. And then we did the survey, we aggregated the outcomes of the responses to that survey and there's other aspects, but the process was what I was looking there. And I created that summary out of that. And then that's a good comparison to also then look at how this process went, that this started already earlier, and this has been more kind of organic process creation along the way as trying to create the deliverable. One of my observation here is also that it's always so much harder, feels so much harder to create the first version. But as long as we and it could be, the process could be easier and faster when we actually start to understand that final version is never final. You know, it's version 1. Then after that, when it goes out, there's going to be, you know, it's going to live certain time, and there's going to start building pressure that we need to create, you know, version 1.1, because that's how software works. And ultimately, that's how everything in the world works. Sometimes you renovate the building, sometimes you blow it up and build a new one. But the space where that is, it's never, you know, going to disappear. So that's kind of my things that I think that it comes easier once getting that notion that now there's a version. And as a side notion, I usually use an ugly logo approach to try to get quickly to the iteration instead of being so nervous about the version 1 of how that's going to be accepted. So anyway, hopefully that's useful.
Hey, Faye, just wanted to say hey.
Hi, welcome.
Hey, I'm lurking. Sorry, I usually don't get to make any of these calls, and I happen to have a time slot free up, so I hopped on. So just here listening and curious as to what you guys have been working on.
Cool.
That's great. Thank you. All right, Mike, what do you think?
Maybe you could, just to help Brett a little bit too, and maybe if other people have similar questions, which they probably do. Can you, as we walk through this, let's just also sort of talk about what steps we will be using, because ultimately I think this group was committed. The idea was that this group was going to finalize a thing, and that thing would be incorporated in the summit, but ValueWeb, your company, your organization, will actually be the one facilitating a process at the ESHIP summit to elicit more input, feedback, constructive criticism, et cetera. So somewhere in all of this, if you could just help us all understand. And I know we haven't finalized that, but at least where it is at in your head.
Sure. Yeah, so a couple of things toward that. You know, obviously this is all very different when done in person versus when done virtually. And so there's ups and downs to it. The ups are that we can have a huge number of people potentially interacting with something asynchronously or together. The tools we're using around that. We love Miro. There's also, there's many versions of it. Part of it obviously is, as Andy knows and speaks to often, is the coordinating the chaos and providing some structure for it. So, and again, I apologize that I don't have everything that Scott's been working on. I know that he's been digging into the values in particular and writing stuff there, but to me, that's an ideal type of space that people even potentially before the summit, again, back to that point of people supporting what they help create, letting people really feel like they're in on that and being able to weigh in and offer feedback, you know, as people who are inside the circle, basically, and being able to have input to something before it's broadly out there in the world. So you can imagine a big virtual whiteboard space with, you know, that canvas that Volto offered, for example, or some version of it, and people being able to offer feedback with Post-its or something like that. And then groups having discussions about little pieces of that or a particular section of it, and having a conversation and, you know, offering some level of feedback or takeaways or questions or insights about that. So that type of a process, obviously as active as possible, and really letting people go where their energy is. So process-wise to be determined, but just to say that in the virtual space in particular, it's you can do something massive, and in some ways it becomes a question of how you handle, you know, if 1,000 people all weigh in on 3 words, then what do you do with that? So that's part of it. As I said, I think very often the parts of this all that end up getting iterated most directly based on feedback tends to be stuff like the values. And I know what Scott's doing is, you know, a direct value and then a couple sentences under each, so that there's a richness and a specificity to that, rather than saying, okay, here's our 6 words, which anybody can pick 6 words. So
one other thing to add real quick is that on the September 29th day of the ESHIP Summit, which is oriented towards ESHIP goals and building the professional field, I imagine, and it still will be determined, we'll know by this meeting next month, that there will be small group opportunities for folks to get together in small groups like this to sort of dig in and just have some conversations to sort of surface group insight and provide feedback. I think there'll be some digital way that people can just, you know, look at it, give us your thoughts, and then there'll be small groups, I think, to make sense. ValueWeb's expertise is really in creating those types of spaces. We'll see how we do that virtually. But, you know, for that field level day, I anticipate a couple hundred people, not thousands, or less than 100, I don't know, but not a lot, which is better because then you can have intimate conversations, where if you have thousands, like how are you going to have 150 small groups? So we'll figure out the more specifics of that, I think, actually in the next couple of weeks, and then come back to this group probably with an outline of what the proposed process is. I mean, not probably, we should have that by the next time this group meets. But let's keep working on the artifact. So Mike, back to you.
Cool. I'm just looking at the different documents in here and wondering which one most people are in right now. Are people on the call in, I see a couple people in the goal, or people in the sandbox. I see 1, 2, 4 people in that one. So that the one kind of top line, you know, draft candidate for a vision is the one that I think, especially given the timeline, that I'd love to share and just get some thinking on. And like I said, I think it's one of a few, but it's the one that personally, when I heard that felt most interesting to me and in line with things. So I kind of want to place it in a document so you can see it's 3 words. So can I put it in the shared vision goal meetup agenda notes? Is that all right? Is everyone in there? I can just put it in the chat too, but it just, it can be underwhelming in a chat window. So.
Is that the first link or the second link that Cecilia shared? You might actually just reshare it, Cecilia, just because Faye won't see it.
You're talking about the agenda notes, yes. So that's the
Just
first.
use that as the.
Oh, it says I got signed out. Suspense.
Okay, and so we're looking at Wednesday, July 15th notes section is where you're gonna put it. Okay.
It literally signed me out as I was. Here we go.
Technical problem.
Right. Okay. So, model entrepreneurial communities. And I'll speak to this for a second and then interested to hear thoughts. What I like about this is it's super short. It's something everyone can remember, and it works in a few different ways. I love that it speaks to the concept of entrepreneur as something that communities are capable of and that can be done at individual or community levels. It talks about both a goal, meaning that when we achieve what we say we're doing, there will be model entrepreneurial communities, as well as an act. So using that as a verb, you know, what is it we do? We model entrepreneurial communities. I love that these three words individually each have, like, they're each doing a lot of work. And super clear again, this was Scott's, hey Mike, I've got one that I think works. And when I heard it, I was like, I think there's a lot this does. So not passing it off as my own. Model both as a goal as well as the work itself. Entrepreneurial communities both being a way of being together, as well as communities of entrepreneurs. I love that each of these three words is central to the way that I've heard, and I think that Scott has heard, and interested again in feedback, but in the way that the work is characterized. It is work, it is entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial, both in its focus as well as in its nature. So it's both the what and the how. And everything eventually lands at communities. This is all about building communities of entrepreneurs, using entrepreneurship and supporting entrepreneurs to build communities. So to me, in three words, which again, brevity is an awful lot of this. The other thing is, I think it avoids some of the things that sometimes have been hangups. And so I personally love that this does not have to say ecosystem. It doesn't have to say builder, and yet it still is working in the space that I hope we recognize. Again, in the name of Scott, I put that out as a candidate and a draft for thinking and feedback. Yeah.
And then just to understand our process, like this is sort of a high level, pithy catch. But part of our issue is just that Scott's still working on the deeper dive into
exactly.
This. He's gonna have to share that sort of asynchronously, and we're gonna just have to leave comments.
Yes. In addition to, like as I said, especially, I mean, to me, this will work. Whatever we have will work in conjunction with, you know, that high level statement, a slightly longer mission type statement, and then a set of values with qualifying statements under each. So, but as a top line, which in many ways I think is again the one that it's hardest for groups to co-create. Yes, this was a particular piece that's come out of his work that like I said, was particularly drawn to.
And then I guess one of my other questions is, because it's hard to respond to this just in its isolation.
Totally. Yes. Is
there other things can we look at? I mean, we just don't have Scott's draft sort of rest of it, right?
Unfortunately not. I asked, I just know he was at the doctor, and when I found out he was not able to make the call, I asked if he could share that stuff, and I just wasn't able to get a hold of him. So, okay. Yeah.
So I think, I mean, I don't know if anyone has any thoughts. I mean, my sense of it is I find it difficult to respond to it without a larger context around it. I mean, I certainly can have opinions, but I mean, it's hard to say without the rest of it. That's my take. But I mean, generally speaking, yes, that's what I think we're trying to do here.
I would say I'm very, and absolutely recognize it's one thing to have something in context and another totally devoid of context. At the same time, I would love to hear if somebody has a positive or a negative reaction to this in any way. I'd personally love to hear it. So please don't be shy. And again, recognizing it's a bit in a vacuum, but just even anything I shared about what I see in this, I would love to hear anyone else's thoughts.
I love it. I mean, I think it's solid. And to your point, you know, we try to stress the ecosystem builder element of this. You don't even have to say the words, but it's pretty well assumed. Yeah, I think you did a good job kind of hitting the multiple different ways that you can define each of these words and how they flow together. So I think it's pretty spot on.
My question looking at it is just to what ends? So that's what I'm looking for, the rest of the context. We're doing that great, but to achieve, to enable what?
So do you mean that the title itself is lacking that, or do you mean that the follow-on needs to really flesh that out?
I mean, I sort of, I mean, frankly, I would like that to be in this statement if it's a single statement, right? Because it doesn't, what is missing is the sort of heart part of it. The what is the compelling, why, to what ends that makes me say, yeah, I want to do that. Whereas, I mean, I think it's very technical sounding in its current form, but to what end? So that I want to read the rest of it, so that I want to learn more, so that I want to go to the event that's about this thing, is the part that's missing to me. Like the thing that, well, I'll keep going on. Let me find this. There's a great phrase in strategic doing that let me look it up real quick. That sort of gets, you have to, your framing, whatever, has to have a heart element to it.
So the other part that communities, I get the model or the ideal model or whatever is inferred, which is great. Hang Up keeps coming back to entrepreneurial because, again, there is challenges about the whole entrepreneurial phrase. So yesterday I was on a Gen call where they were talking about the Entrepreneurship World Cup. And Jim McKelvey, the founder of Square, was talking about a blog post that he had written in a book called Innovation Stack. And so he distinguished business person and entrepreneur. He says business people copy what works, while entrepreneurs must create something new. And I posted it in the 5X group, since they're the ones working on the definitions and all of that. And so Mike Ryan said something to the effect of it fits well with the definition as somebody who takes additional risk, and the businessman is essentially risking far less risk by copying a working model. And then there's a whole longer sentence from Norris, and then Marcus chimed in as well. So there's still, I mean, I know when Andy and I were at GEC and he interviewed people, and as many people as he interviewed about entrepreneurship, there were that many different answers. There was, and then I think, Andy, if I'm not mistaken, you asked something like, so what do people need? And I know that reading through some of the transcript notes is like, people could agree that there's some level of education that needs to be had. So they could agree on some of the elements of what an entrepreneurial ecosystem or thriving communities or all of that has. So that's the elements, but what and who people are is still hard. So that's the challenge with entrepreneurial, because Main Street businesses versus, you know, high tech, high growth, and all of that becomes a reoccurring discussion, a point of dissension, argument, whatever.
I would comment on the aspect also of basically the why aspect of like, why do we then do this? Like, if this is what we do, then why do we do it? So that's kind of the one aspect. And the hardest part for me is because I'm like, have learned to be so like magnifying glasses on the terminology, because that's, you know, the root of all evil that goes bad in this whole mess, is that there's the connection between communities and ecosystems it needs to be addressed one way or the other. So because communities by definition, like we have to accept that ecosystem withholds multiple communities. And therefore, then this kind of, in my mind, leaves that aspect out, that if we model communities, are we then forgetting the ecosystem that connects them? So that's kind of the balance. The risk of communities, there can be, you know, big communities, globally crossing, you know, movements that can be called communities, but yet they have something that combines them and separates them from another community. But more likely in the local ecosystem, there are, you know, developer communities, there's business communities, there's, you know, XYZ communities, they all interact and people are part of multiple communities inside the ecosystem. And then finally, I think that this super connector aspect that is a big part of, I know many ecosystem builders DNA, let's put it that way, the human aspect of things. This seems to miss that connecting people aspect in the essence that it's there. It's more kind of I mean, I like it because it's, you know, taking point to the infrastructure aspect of it, but I think it's missing the human connecting people, super connectors type of essence of it is missing. So
I think both the connecting and the inclusion bit are like, when you ask people what ecosystem building is, you get both of those points, and they're obviously implied in the word community. Like, you don't have to say inclusive, because a thriving community would be inclusive of everyone, but like that's, I mean by definition, but also it's like you almost have to say it. And the connecting, you almost have to say it. I mean, part of it is like you did a really good job of getting pithy, but you maybe went too pithy, like even, you know, down to 3 words. So it's somewhere that element, I'm not saying you have to use the word connecting or inclusive, but I think I agree with Balto that it's like it's the thing that makes it different from regular entrepreneurial support, which is you help entrepreneurs. It's the connecting aspect that I think is the thing that makes it not just a fancy word for entrepreneurial support. And so the vision, I think, has got to capture that element. And again, I'm not saying those words, but
Yep.
Yeah, it's, in my mind, it's like, how do you combine our end in mind being thriving economies, but also the social impact? How do you put those two together in a vision statement?
And I guess also that aspect of the ecosystem, that I guess we could say that communities are managed by someone, created by someone, controlled by someone, but ecosystems are not. So that's the annoying part of them, is that they are this kind of blob that doesn't fit into any, you try to put it in any shape and it always just reshapes itself and doesn't fit to anyone's, you know, agenda. Just keep changing the form.
To build on that, just the thing I would just add though is that whatever the vision is, there are still people at the center of it. And that's, I think that we want to capture that there's one person in charge, no one owns the ecosystem, no one's fully responsible for it, but at the center of it, ecosystems are about people and the connections between them. And so it's like somehow you want to get that human aspect of it. you know, and because I think that's, I mean, just thinking about like how you would use this, I'm thinking a little too far ahead, but like you think how you use this, I think the places that fall the shortest in doing ecosystem building work is they put jobs or the economy at the center of it. And they say, we're doing this so we can create the economy. And you're like, well, okay, but at the center of it needs to be the people. And so what ends up happening when they do it that way is they try to achieve a vision that is just like, well, we'll just build all the infrastructure and then the people will show up, versus what we want the vision to say is start with the people, just start humans at the center.
I think humans at the center is really important. And the challenge going back to entrepreneur is that a lot of communities are very exclusive in the kind of entrepreneurs that they'll support. So, or that they throw financial support or whatever behind. It's a lot of high tech, high growth, leaving out other kinds. So while communities also, to Valto's point, it's like communities have not been inclusive, particularly, and that's the problem, right? So the system, everybody says the system's broken or the system is working, but the system works for the people that the system was built for. Communities are also that way. When you look at, I think without things like thriving or robust or inclusive, it's not enough because we haven't called it out. I think we have to actually point it out in order for it to be top of mind, because we can't assume that everybody's going to think that way, because obviously in all of this time, it hasn't happened.
Here's another, just another random thought, which, well, actually, let me go ahead. Someone else should go. I've said my piece. Beth, any thoughts?
I've been putting them in chat, but yeah, it's I think human-centered or words that mean that might be key to being included in a vision statement.
And it may make sense to just put those things in the values too, or somehow, but it's like figuring out which level you want to drop it in on.
For sure.
Yeah, that's basically one of the reasons for that canvas and framework, is that without it, we try to put things into a vision that we feel that are missing because we don't see them elsewhere. And vision should not live in isolation, because by itself it's not actionable. In a sense, like it should be that, you know, the North Star that we all, you know, can align behind. But then, you know, there's these other terms that have been created for a reason, for what their purpose is, and that gives more room to create, because like all of those can fit in, you know, one document in and if they want to be written in a longer sentence, they can be combined together for a, you know, a manifesto, if you will. But that's why kind of like we should also use the other parts to address those.
Just wondering, Hassan and Faye, I know you said you're lurking, Faye, but just any thoughts? Just want to make space in case you want to share anything.
Yeah, thanks you for asking. You know, I love that this is happening. I think it's great to the focus of being able to put this in words that are not jargony. So I appreciate that direction, and I will echo Cecilia's comments about making equity and inclusion, baking that in to the DNA, because it needs to be implicit. So that would be my thought.
So maybe in the last couple of minutes, if we can, so we'll share this video with Scott. Is there some things to send his way to, I think we've talked about the human-centeredness and the inclusion and things like that. Are there any other things, points of mind that that you want to call out so that we help support Scott in sharing some of that? And I will include the chat into the review.
I mean, just basically what I'd say is just being mindful of our process and our timeline. Is the hope would be that by the end of August, we got to a pretty solid, like, yeah, this is good enough to put out there. I always call it 85%. Everyone agrees about 80 to 85%. This is something we can do. If we can get to that, that'd be great. I don't know if it's full canvas. I don't know if it's a couple statements and a value list. I think we have to decide, but recognizing that this group really only has one other scheduled meeting in a month, we really want to be clear what we're going to have at that point to reflect on and kind of really use that last August gathering or call to sort of get feedback. But if there's a way to do stuff asynchronously, whether through the Slack or whatever, to share and give feedback, I think that would be helpful just to keep it moving along over time. We may, yeah, because actually, what is today? Okay, because in a month we'll be at the ESHIP Summit, so we won't, or 2 months we'll be at the ESHIP Summit, so this call wouldn't exist in September. Unless we moved it.
Just for the sake of sharing here, it's ironic maybe that earlier today I was on a call and they specifically were talking about human-centered design and the concept of human-centeredness and how it's worked in many ways and also how problematic it's becoming because of well, just the path we've been on as humanity and the idea of design and intent intersecting obviously with historical concepts of colonialism and oppression and other things that in many ways it's brought us to the brink. and so there's xenocentric design, understanding what it means to literally design not just for humans, but for a whole system, certainly not just for yourself, but also including others in a process. So just to mention, it's an interesting field that seems to be growing, and yeah, just a thing for us to consider. Obviously, I understand that the spirit that's offered in here is humanity, but also recognizing the specific points of view that sometimes humanity has expressed in its own sake, often very well intentioned, but just recognizing sometimes the shortcomings of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, there was actually one interesting article on one other community, totally like separate that, but it's working on this concept of my data, and it's of course because of the term it's person's own data and helping them to get better control and so forth. But there also was already that, well, that doesn't complete everything, so it should be more. There was a good, I'll find that blog post and share that separately, but it was that it should be designed for society versus for individuals, because for individuals leaves out a lot of things. So I think that was somehow related to what you shared as well. So it's good to understand that aspect as well. And of course, entrepreneurs establish structures which are companies that have other people that, so anyway, so it needs to be more broadly than just, thinking the individual entrepreneurs, I guess.
Great. When I would just say, when do you have a sense of when we might? I mean, you'll obviously have to circle back with Scott, but just sort of a timeline to expect some of that sharing, only because I want to make sure I give it enough time, because I think it is an important step of feedback that Scott, particularly because he's sort of slightly outside of this conversation or new to the conversation. We want to make sure that he gets enough time to get the feedback and then he can incorporate the feedback. I know you're working more closely with him, so I know it's not up to you entirely.
Yeah, my sense is that he'll watch and listen to this, and he and I will have a conversation about it, and that he would iterate, and probably I would expect that he would share maybe the direction he'd already gone as far as the values, and just get some feedback on that too. But I think he'll share that this week in the next day or two. 'Cause I think he's got it. So, and then in terms of iterating this and getting feedback, I would expect early next week that, and again, I know there's more than this one. Like I said, there's a lot about this one that I thought worked really well. I do think that comparing that and maybe weighing in on others would be helpful as well. So I'd say early next week and throughout next week, it would be great if people could, when he shares that, if people could weigh in.
So that's the question, that maybe if he shares it on Slack, and then I'll email again everybody who's been on the calls, or signed up on the calls, so that everybody has an email inbox with the videos and the links to everything. So
one thing I'll add before we cut off here, just reading through the ESHIP Gold Project Team 3133 Sandbox doc, it has the 6 questions. The 3rd question, the 6th question, the responses in there have some really, really powerful stuff that aligns well with what we've been talking about here. So if it's just Scott, I would definitely just want him to be sure to reference that if there's a feeling that, maybe there's just a better understanding of where these minds have taken this. It's in there, especially the 6th one. I mean, it's got a lot of great stuff in there. And there's commonalities that emerge, so I think that gives a little sense of consensus too.
So
Cool.
where does everybody recommend that we document the process? Because I know, Walter, you talked about the process being important. And as we share this to the wider group at the ESHIP Summit, I think that is the need to talk about how we created, if anybody wants to help take a draft at that, so that we can
I think it'll just be, my sense is we'll just capture that in the process of figuring out how we're going to get feedback at the summit, because we'll have to sort of, whatever the process, I think we're going to have to explain where it came from.
Okay. Well, that sounds good. I will make sure that we link this into the agenda notes and post it as well on the dashboard. And we will look forward to communicating on Slack in the meantime.
Cool. Thanks, Mike, for
Thank you.
wrangling it all.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks all. Good to see
Bye-bye.
your faces. Bye.
And I would say this, just something like this often can spur something. So if in the middle of the night, something strikes you and you're like, oh my God, I want them to consider this, or what amazing words, just put them in the Slack, because they may well. Yeah.
Okay.
Can we not get together one more time before next month?
Well, we'll meet in August before the summit. So.
Right. But I think let's see how the next week goes, and if we're feeling time and energy and the necessity of a small group reconnecting, maybe we can make space for that. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks.